Okay, everyone, welcome. Oops, hold on just a second. It bounced my screen. There it is. Okay, so today we're going to talk about diversity statements and letters of recommendation. So this is the third in a series of 3 webinars about the elements of a teaching application in higher education. And these are our final 2 subjects that we're going to cover. Welcome, and you'll notice your audio and video are off, and it'll remain that way for the course of the webinar. So if you have questions or comments or things you'd like to communicate to me after the presentation, I will check the questions section. So if you want to type things in the questions as the presentation is going, go for it. I will get all of that right at the end. This will be recorded, and we will make it available after the event. I'll send out links to everybody. You can download 2 resources from our handouts section in the navigation. And if you experience any technical difficulties, please don't hesitate to reach out to our support at av_support@mcad.edu. This event is sponsored by the MCAD MFA program, and if you're curious about that program, we have more information at mcad-mfa.com. And thank you to Seth. We couldn't do these without our wonderful tech support, so many thanks. So we're going to dive in right away. We're going to go into diversity statements, and these are rather new in the academic application packet. I would say they started to come into regular use around 2013, 2014. So these have only been in real use for about 5 or 6 years. And so it's important to discuss them and to figure out what is expected of you when you're creating your diversity statement. So the structure is very similar to your teaching philosophy or your research statement in that it is a 1-page essay. And that means it has to have all the components you'd normally encounter in a 1-page essay. You've got to have an intro and a conclusion, and you've got to have supporting paragraphs in between. And there's many ways you might structure this. One might be in terms of research, teaching, and mentorship, or you might even stick a 4th paragraph in there on service, or if 3 of those are relevant to you and 1 isn't, you might take 1 out and focus on just 3. But that's just one way you could structure this. If you look at the template in the download, you'll notice there's a couple different suggestions. Some people take a past and future focus for their statement. Others might organize it under larger concepts or goals. It's entirely up to you. The point with the structure is that it has to be easy to read from anyone's point of view, because as we've said before, you just don't know who's on that committee. And so you have to always write in clear, fast to read, easily understandable ways. And we just said you might structure in terms of past versus future. You could also look at a statement of values in the intro sentence, followed by various experiences that support those values. And then maybe you close it out with a statement of your plans for the future. So as I said, you can do this in many different ways, but you do need a structure. It's not okay to just go out with a stream of consciousness. That is not welcome in a 1-page essay. So how do you get there? I recommend starting with a pretty intense self-reflection writing exercise. And this is about quantity over quality. You're going to ask yourself a bunch of different questions. You're just going to self-reflect, brainstorm, get a whole bunch of quantity onto a page or into a Word document or something like that. And then you can examine that brain dump by looking for common words, common experiences that you reference over and over, and those are going to be clues that that's what you need to keep in your statement. So what are those prompts? What are those questions we should be answering? Certainly you should start with some definitions, and you might not put these definitions into your statement, but you need to know what they mean to you if you're going to write about them. So start with the basics. What does diversity mean? What does inclusion mean? What does equity mean? What does accessibility mean? Sometimes you see DEI or DEIA mentioned. All of these concepts are interwoven, interlinked, and you need to know what they mean for you. So think about specific examples that you can reference in relationship to these 3 or 4 words. And as always, in every document, in any application packet, you show, you don't tell. So you're not just saying that these things mean something to you. You have to provide examples and concrete examples for your audience to latch onto, rather than just telling us a story about how much this is important to you. All right, so how does diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility intersect with your teaching? This might be one of your headings. And in fact, I would say if out of all of them, this might be the one that's most required, because no matter where you're applying, you will be teaching. The weight of the research changes depending on what type of institution, but you will be teaching at every institution you apply to. So you need to address this. How do you plan to serve a student body that's diverse in a multitude of ways? And you can think beyond race. This isn't just about race or ethnicity. It's also about socioeconomic status, age. It could be about religion, academic preparedness, sexuality, disability, gender expression, basically any difference that you can think of related to identity. All of those are fair game for your diversity statement. And you'll want to talk about course design, because this is really central to your ability to address diversity, equity, and inclusion. You might talk about assessments. You might talk about bias in grading. You could talk about how you diversify your course content. What kind of inclusive language do you always make sure that you're using? How do you structure your syllabus to be more accessible? How do you structure your classroom to be more accessible? Also, assessment in terms of feedback. When are you asking for feedback? How are you asking for feedback? And how are you integrating that feedback into an improved learning experience for your students? And again, examples, concrete examples are necessary. You can't just say that you do all of these things. You have to explain how do you do these things and what the results have been. Also, how do you create a welcoming atmosphere? So what do you do to make sure, both in an in-person experience and now with COVID, how do you make an online experience welcoming? How do you show that you've actually reflected on this and that you care? That would be a great concrete example to include in your diversity statement. Think about how you structure active learning projects. This is really important in an online environment, one that is probably going to catch people's eyes if you mention it. How do you talk about power, privilege, positionality in relationship to diversity? All of those things are important. And how do you ensure that your course readings, your selections, your sources reflect diverse perspectives? Because you don't want to accidentally teach a course that just has white authors or white examples or white artists, designers mentioned. And you don't want to have a lack of diversity in any of the other categories that we've mentioned either. So if you're able to actually articulate how you do that and how you check yourself, then you've got a really concrete example for reference there as well. And then if you've done this and you've done it successfully, which hopefully you have, because it's really important work that we all need to be doing, talk about what the impact was on students. Did they notice? Did you point it out? How did this affect the assignments or the outcomes? Be ready to talk about the whole experience, from planning to execution to assessing that experience. What are your values regarding DEIA in relationship to your professional life? Have you participated in service activities? This could be university service, regional service, local service, national service. Have you presented symposiums, workshops, conferences? And did that experience encompass and include diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility? Hopefully it did. And if it didn't, you can also write about that and about your experience in how you would do it differently in the future, knowing what you know now. What skills did you build during those experiences? If you have engaged in diversity-related experience or service, how will you incorporate that into this job that you're applying for? The diversity statement is no different than any of the other application materials that you're writing. It should be slightly tailored to the job that you're applying to. So it's not a bad idea to take all this brainstorming, save it in a document, and be able to reference back to it and take the relevant bits for various jobs and switch examples in and out of your statement so that, again, it really feels like you've taken the time to tailor your materials for this position. What do you think is valuable about diversity in higher education settings? Or why do you think diversity is valuable in higher education settings? You want to think about your experiences, especially with mentorship or advising, because if you're able to talk about how you're able to successfully advise or mentor members of a marginalized group, that would be a really good concrete example to mention in your diversity statement. How did you help them address barriers? Was it in terms of crafting their research? Was it in terms of helping them in the classroom with your teaching or tutoring, maybe outside of the classroom? Did you just help with general career goals and advising, looking at big picture versus small picture? Or were you mentoring or advising out in the community beyond your academic setting? And then also, what efforts do you do with recruitment? This can be really a good point to touch on because, as we all know, the academy is not as diverse as it should be. And if you have experience with recruiting diverse candidates, that's a great thing to mention here too, because you can talk about what's successful, what's not, why do you use the techniques that you do, and that will pique a lot of departments' interests as well. How about your discipline specifically? How does your research, your scholarship, your artwork, your design work directly address diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility? And how? How does it? It's not enough to say that it does address these topics. You have to demonstrate with concrete examples how you're doing this. It can't hurt too to talk about your discipline at large. Some disciplines are, well, and most actually are woefully not diverse. So how can you discuss your discipline and what you can do to affect systemic change? Or if you've been successful in affecting a change, talk about it for your discipline. And then also, it never hurts to tie it back to student learning and engagement if you're able to. So keep that in mind. So other questions you can ask yourself in relationship to the discipline question. Does your research or scholarship address specific marginalized groups? If so, describe the connection. Has your research or scholarship been shared with the community or public in a way that promotes scholarship or access rather to scholarship? Because often we know academia is a fairly cloistered environment. Academics are notorious for not writing in accessible ways or not publishing in accessible publications, or for artists and designers, not showing in accessible locations. So if you've been able to breach that barrier, talk about it. That will be really valuable for a potential department to know about. Has your scholarship involved collaboration with diverse groups of colleagues or commentators? That's really useful. If you have done that, if you have cultivated these skills, talk about them, showcase them. Also, this brings up a really good question about the disclosure of your identity. If your elements of your identity inform your research or your teaching or your scholarship, you might want to disclose your identity. But I say that with a big but. You want to think carefully before you make that that disclosure, because in some cases, for some searches, that will be key. You will rise to the top of the pool because they are truly looking for a diverse candidate. And if they're not, though, then there's no way to know if this is going to affect if their biases will affect your candidacy. So some of the best advice you can get here when you're debating, do I disclose this element of my identity or not, is try to get input. See if you know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody at that school, department, search, and find out if this is a welcoming environment, is it not? And then you really have to ask yourself questions about your own values, like what do you feel comfortable or safe disclosing, and what do you not? Are you in a place where you feel that it is okay to disclose an element of your identity? Then go for it. No holds bars. But if you're worried about that, do pause and do think about it so that you're doing what's safest for you. Because the academic machine will keep on churning regardless. And I would always advocate for do no harm to yourself. There will be more jobs to apply to. And if you're worried about it, then you should take those worries seriously and not take a risk to hurt yourself in that disclosure. So that is our last note on diversity statements. And now we're going to switch gears to letters of recommendation. This is tricky because this is not a document that you produce. It has sensitive elements just like the diversity statement does. And it's a fraught element of the application package because of many reasons, which we'll get to. But typically what you can expect is that you're going to need 3 letters of recommendation for some of the jobs you're applying to. There has been a turning of the tide recently, and I have noticed fewer letters required, which I think is a really positive, really great thing. But at the very least, you're probably still going to have to provide contact information for your recommenders. So at this point in the game, right now we're in almost August, I would recommend reaching out to 3 to 5 recommenders, and you'll want to just let them know I'm about to go on the market. You should avoid having letters that are older than a year, just because there's a perception that they become stale or dated. So this summer, for next year's job market, find 3 to 5 people that can write you a letter. And also, don't be afraid to take them out to coffee, either virtually or physically distanced, and talk to them about your career goals. Talk to them about your upcoming year of applications. They're going to want to support you, especially if you've done a good job of cultivating a network in this time. And prepare them for how many letters you might be asking for. I put in parentheses here, or better yet, tell them about your Interfolio account. And in case people here don't know about Interfolio, this is a dossier service, and this is where you can email out to one of your letter writers and say, you know, Professor such and such, or maybe it's a gallery director you've worked with, or a publication editor, whatever. Will you write me a generic letter of recommendation for the upcoming academic job market? And we'll upload it to Interfolio. And then once it's there, if they want it to stay confidential, they can leave it confidential. But then you have the control to send that letter out as soon as you need to. And what you'll find is, and I would imagine this will continue to be very difficult during the age of COVID. This fall is going to be a very stressful time for a lot of the folks that you might lean on for letters. If the letter is in Interfolio, you can send it when you need to send it. If you're relying on them to send the letter individually to the department you're applying to, sometimes, and this happens with the very best people with the best intentions, they just get buried. They are too busy and they forget. And even with lots of good, well-timed reminders, sometimes life happens and they just can't get the letter out as planned. And it's very rarely that they have any animosity towards you. It's just that academic life is incredibly busy. And if you can take that one piece off of their load, they'll really appreciate it. And also it will reduce your anxiety as an applicant. So that's my note about Interfolio. And the reason why you might hesitate to use Interfolio is it is a paid service. I think it's $45 for the year. But The good thing is you can also use that for applying to residencies, grants, or other opportunities that require letters. And you can have your letter recommenders update a generic residency letter, a generic like work letter if you're applying for jobs outside of academia. So it's a really useful tool, but the downside is that it's paid. So keep that in mind. It might be something that you budget for because it's so helpful to have it. All right, after the meeting, with your 3 to 5 coffees with your references, email them and ask them if they'd be willing to write a positive letter for you. The reason why I say email later is because if somebody doesn't feel confident that they can write you a positive letter, you do not want them to write the letter for you. It will not be a good letter. It will not be the most supportive letter possible. And it's much easier for a person to decline writing a letter over email than it is in person. You never want to pressure somebody to write a letter if they don't truly want to, because like I said, it just won't be the highest quality letter that you can receive. So make the ask after you've met with them and sort of refresh them on your career and where you are right now. All right. Once you've gotten a yes out of them, congratulations. That's a huge hurdle completed. You do need to provide a good deal of material to them so that they can write, again, the highest quality letter possible. So things that you will give them, number one, a deadline. Everybody needs a deadline so that they can get it done and get it off their schedules. Interfolio is a really good tool for this because you can automate the email, and you put their email and their contact information in there, and it sends them an automatic email that says, hi, so-and-so has asked you to upload a letter. Please do so at this link. They upload it, and it tracks whether they've done it or not, so you can see. And if you need to remind them, you can send a very simple reminder email. Also, you need to give them your CV. You need to give them, if you're having them not use Interfolio and you're going to have them send letters individually to individual applications, that's more work for you also, because you must give them the job ad for every single job that you're applying for. So if you are opting to avoid Interfolio, don't forget the job ad, because they should be customizing your letter to every job then in that case. Does the letter need to be addressed to anyone in particular, or is this a general letter? This is another question for if you use general for Interfolio or you use specific for individual letters. That's something that they might prefer to customize. And you might run into people who are just like, they don't like the concept of Interfolio, so they refuse to write a general letter. I have run into that. I think that's becoming less and less the trend as people get more used to these services and how helpful they are. But don't be surprised if some folks, especially if they haven't been on the market for a really long time, they just don't fully understand what it's like to be on the job market, and they might refuse to use Interfolio on some sort of grounds like that. In that case, they will want the job ad and who it should be addressed to. Also, if you're giving them specific letters, you can provide, if you're asking them for specific letters, you can provide your cover letter for the job. You can also provide a generic cover letter, which just shows the elements that you would generally include so that they know what you're saying to potential schools. And in your coffee date, hopefully you talked about your overall career goals, but in case they missed it, don't be afraid to type those up for them. That can be really helpful. Give them a copy of your teaching philosophy, a copy of a diversity statement. And what this does, it also gives them key examples that they can pull into the letter and celebrate you through those examples. So that's another reason that we always want to put concrete examples into all our documents. And here's one more plug for Interfolio or a similar service. When you have a tight deadline, which happens all the time, sometimes schools don't get approval to fund a search until very late in the game, and the ad will go up and it might just stay up for a week or two. And I say typically you should give your references at least 2 weeks to write their letter. It's just not only basically respectful, it also is realistic. Some people just don't have time within 2 weeks or within less than 2 weeks to write a letter. So if a job comes up with a tighter deadline than that, it can feel really weird to ask your letter writer to turn out a letter that fast. Some people will do it, and others it's actually not possible. They just don't have time. So that's where Interfolio becomes a real lifesaver. I would recommend starting now and asking your letter writers to write that letter now. Give them, 3 or 4 weeks if you want. But that way, by the time September hits, your letters are squared away. They're in that stable in Interfolio, and they're ready and waiting for you, and you don't have to think about it anymore. Okay, writing a letter of recommendation for yourself. This shouldn't happen, but regretfully, it does happen. So you need to be prepared. If one of the people you have worked with, you really admire, say, oh yeah, I'll sign a letter that you write for me. That I've had that happen several times. It's disappointing, but if you really want that person to do the letter for you, you need to be prepared with the steps for how to write an excellent letter of recommendation for yourself. So this is a link in this slide of the elements you can strive to include in a letter. And then also I've got a template link. So if you're unsure what should the chunks of a letter of recommendation include, that template will walk you through it. Also, the second link here is a list of helpful qualities to mention. These are leadership qualities, and these are really great to sprinkle throughout a letter to make it clear that not only could you be a teacher, a researcher, but also you could potentially be a leader at that institution. Also, it's really important to be aware of biases in any letter of recommendation, including the one that you write for yourself. And so this third link will give you a list of those biases you might encounter, as well as language to avoid. This includes gendered language. It includes subservient language. This is really important for grad students, especially, or people who are fresh to the field. Sometimes as you graduate and enter to become a peer, a colleague, we forget to slough off some of that power dynamic difference. You are now an equal, and some of the language that you choose can insinuate that, yes, indeed, you are an equal, while as other language can insinuate that you're still less than the other colleagues at that new institution you're applying to. So you always want to elevate and be equal to the people you're applying to. Inequality. Okay, I am not a fan of letters of recommendation, and I have to put in this little soapbox moment. Letters of recommendation were developed to perpetuate systems of privilege and racism. You can click this link and read about the history of that. Ivy League schools invented letters of recommendation as a way to limit admission of marginalized groups, and that included African Americans, Catholics, and Jewish people. And the racist history of these letters is a shadow that follows them through to today. Some people don't have access to great letter writers for a variety of socioeconomic reasons or other diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility reasons. So the reason I bring this up is because a lot of times letters of recommendation are required to be confidential, and you can choose to follow that recommendation or not. As a protest, I personally always share my letters of recommendation with the person whom I'm recommending. I don't believe in the idea of confidential letters, and if I don't feel comfortable writing a letter for somebody, I will simply decline. And I recommend you do so too. Because if you can't write a positive letter and you're going to secretly submit a half-baked letter or a sort of enthusiastic letter, it's really a disservice to that person and misleading, because they're assuming you're going to say nice things and positive things. So a couple things you can do to sort of undermine the system of letters of recommendation are: one, don't make them confidential, share them. Two, if you have the ability to remove letters of recommendation from a search process, please advocate for that, because it does continue to perpetuate these systems of inequality. So keep that in mind, that while you probably will have to continue engaging with this system of letters, there are little ways that you can work against that system until it dissipates and hopefully disappears completely. So as I've said on the last 3 of our webinars, you should read this book. I'm not paid to say that, but it's a good book. And Karen Kelsky has a lot of great thoughts on just the realities of the job market in higher ed, and it's worth a read. Also, she has a blog that's free if you don't want to buy a book or buy a used copy of the book. Also, if you're looking for more reading material, this is also a good book. It's a little bit older, so some of the material isn't quite as relevant, but it still has a lot of good examples in it. And if you're thinking strategically about your career, think about what your application might be missing. What classes have you not taught yet? Or what classes could really make you stand out from the crowd? And look at continuing education. MCAD has a call out right now. This tiny URL will take you right to their application, but there's also lots of opportunities online or at other institutions where you can apply to teach continuing education courses, and these can be a great way to develop your portfolio of student work, to develop your listing of courses for which you are responsible and capable of teaching, and be really strategic about your career by engaging with these opportunities that aren't necessarily tenure track, visiting, adjunct, any of those full-time but not tenure track positions. You can work around that system using continuing education. And then there's a whole bunch of sources, because both of these topics today, diversity statements and letters of recommendation, are really fraught. And it's because these 2 elements of the application packet are the most entangled or intersecting with diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. So there's a lot to read there. There's so much more out there. These are just some that I picked and used in referencing this presentation. So we've got about 15-20 minutes here. I'm going to look at our questions bar and see if we've got any questions from people. Okay. This is bleak question for COVID times. Let's say you have an excellent letter of rec from somebody, but then suddenly they pass away. Oh my gosh, yeah, that is bleak. Let's see. I don't know the answer to this question. I think that the right thing to do in this situation is to remove the letter upon their passing. That said, COVID times are strange times, and if they pass suddenly and you were planning on using it for an application, perhaps you can send it within a respectful window of time. But yeah, that is a really tough question. I think you should probably remove it. And I think too, this is also why you'd want to have in normal times 3 to 5 recommenders, so you can sort of cycle through them, especially if you're not using Interfolio. I guess I'm thinking of this through the lens of, if you have a letter on file from someone who has passed, is it your responsibility to delete that? And I think yes. I think it's probably most appropriate to delete that upon their passing. But I would be really interested to hear what other people have to say about that. I'm guessing people would be understanding as well if you really only had that letter and you needed to get the application in. We are living in extraordinary times right now. So, but I appreciate the question. That's a really excellent question that I don't have a good answer for right now. Okay, let's see here. Oh, somebody says, thank you for saying this in regards to letters of rec and inequality. Absolutely. I mean, and you can probably tell by the presentation itself, but I really don't believe in letters of recommendation. I think that they perpetuate systems of inequality, privilege, really awful things that we're all working hard to get rid of. So if you find yourself in a position of privilege where you can strike that from the application, do get rid of them, because they're a waste of time on so many fronts, whether it's the letter writers, the people who are soliciting letters, because you have to spend a bit of social capital to make that request. And we are artists and designers. We don't have a lot of excess social capital to spend on things like letters of recommendation. It's much better spent in other ways that can further our career, rather than on obnoxious requests for letters. So I hear that. All right, next up, who are acceptable folks to ask for a recommendation from? Do academic colleagues hold more weight than, say, a gallery director or a community nonprofit director? That's an excellent question. And this is a question that changes based on the job that you're applying to. So if, let's say, we've talked in some of the past webinars about the hierarchy of academic institutions. If you're applying to like an Ivy League or an R1, a research institution, certainly other respected academics will hold more weight, unless it is a gallery director at a really, really well-recognized gallery, or a museum director, or somebody who holds a lot of social capital in the art or design world. That said, if you're applying to a job, and let's say the focus is on socially engaged art or community engagement, absolutely, you should have a recommender in there who can speak to your abilities in this way. So make that decision based on the individual application. And also, again, I know I've said it before, but this is a great reason to have a whole stable of people who can recommend you, because certain ones will serve you in different ways depending on what the situation is. All right. As for contact information for recommendations, most of mine would rather write an email or letter than have phone contact. How do you deal with all of these different contact options when gathering your recommendations? This is a very good question. I've run into that myself as well, where a recommender will say, yes, but I will only give you my office email, and they won't give any other contact information. One way that I've worked around this is, if they work at an institution like a university or a college, or even a gallery, is I will include their preferred piece of contact information, perhaps that email address, and then I will fill in, because often what happens is on that software where you're uploading this information, it's required. And that's where I will put in the generic, like the gallery's phone number, or the school or the department's phone number for where they work at. And that way, if somebody obnoxiously doesn't pay attention to, this is the preferred contact information, they're going to get redirected anyway to that preferred mode of communication. But yes, you're right, that does happen. And that's my workaround for it, is I try to find what they want to be contacted at, and then I fill in the rest of it with the more generic information. So anyone else? Any other questions about diversity statements or about letters of recommendation? Anything? Got like 5 minutes. No last elements. That's okay. I'm gonna make a long pause in case people are thinking. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you all so much for attending, and I really appreciate all your great questions. This is really useful. And I'll be in touch soon with a link to this recording, to the presentations, and I'll send everybody all 3 of them from Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, as well as the handouts. So thank you. Have a good one, everyone.